Okay, welcome everyone to today's eRequesting TDG meeting. I'll just go through the agenda, what we've got planned for today. So we just got our usual business, minutes, action items, and other updates. Then I'm going to take you through a proposal for default obligations on must support elements and actor conformance requirements. So these were sent out to the TDG last Friday, I think it was. So there's a compliments page that you were able to have a look at before the meeting, as well as the other proposals we've got here that Andy's going to walk us through on My Health Record consent withdrawal, which we talked a little bit about in the last meeting, but we'll go through that in more detail now today, and also communication request features as well. So we've got some branches we can walk you through and try and get some decisions made on those features and talk about the next meeting. So for the approval of minutes, so our last meeting was on the 30th of January. And up to the minutes. Yeah. Okay, so these are the minutes that were distributed, I think last Friday as well, with those other things. So this has our additional co-chairs that were added in there, decisions in there, and other decisions we made during the meeting. I'd like to see if anyone would like to motion to approve these minutes. Anyone's there would like to do that?
I'll motion that, Michael. Christy.
Thanks, Christy. Do I have a second?
I'll second, Steph.
Thanks, Steph. I have a second. So I will launch a poll for the approval of these minutes. Okay. Hopefully you can see that poll now for the approval of minutes. If you weren't at the meeting or anything, you just vote abstain. That seems to slow down. I'll just stop that poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so for that we have, I'll just check the chat, see if there's any others in there. So we have, it was successful. We have 17 affirmative, 0 negative, and 5 abstained. Okay. Jump back to for action items. These we've got our old action items here about the proposals for task business status and task code. I think what we'll aim to do is we'll get those together, send out prior to the next meeting. Hopefully then we can discuss and finalize those at our next meeting in 2 weeks. For the action item on CDG and TDG ground principles for inclusion criteria, maybe in scope items, this is, we're still looking at the creation of a harmonization group for escalation of things that need to be addressed by the CDG. The TDG identify need to be addressed by the CDG. So that's still in progress, setting up that group. And then we had last week one raised about our display sequence extension, about Andy raising that for the firework group to see if they want to exist in AU base. I assume we haven't done that yet, Andy. It hasn't been raised yet, has it?
Yeah, it has.
Oh, it has? Yeah. Okay, was there?
They all said that all sounds very interesting. We at the moment don't have any additional use cases that would provide a way forward or a change in what you're doing. So continue on as you're currently doing. And if some point in the future we need to provide a modification, we will discuss and do so, but there was no outstanding reason to change what we were proposing at the moment.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so we can close that action item. And moving on, just got an update about ballot for comment as well. We're still haven't finalised yet. A few more of our resolved items have been applied. We're getting close. We've got nearly 90% applied. We've still got our one issue for reconciliation, which is the pregnancy status. I'm thinking we will try and bring that to the TDG next meeting as well. We'll likely still need some CDG input for that, given it's referenced in a draft of the AU core data for interoperability. But we can get a position that maybe we'll take back to them and say, this is what we think we would like to do in the TDG, and just get confirmation that that's acceptable for the clinical design group. But we'll likely bring something to the next meeting to discuss that as well. Other updates, we have the Trans-Tasman Symposium and the HL7 Australia Fire Work Group meeting. That's in Sydney on Tuesday, the 18th of March. Now, this is the day before the Connectathon, and it's ticketed separately to the Connectathon. So the Connectathon is sold out, but this is not yet. So we're going to run in that a eRequesting TDG meeting in the last session of the day in Q4. And we'll probably look to focus in that meeting around service request groups, given it's a good opportunity to have a bit of that in-depth discussion face-to-face. And would also lead into some work we might do on that, or further breakouts and technical discussions in the Connectathon as well. So there are still tickets available for this. I will just show you and provide the link. Put the link in the chat. There it goes there. Yep. So there are separate tickets here for if you select tickets for the symposium or the work group meeting. So if you want to come along to the eRequesting TDG on day, you can get tickets by selecting the fire work group meeting for that. So it'd be a good opportunity to have a face-to-face. We should have hybrid facilities available. It's going to be in the Microsoft building, so I think we're going to be on Teams. But once we've got those details, we'll send those out to the TDG. So if you can't make it on the day, you can still participate in that TDG meeting. Then the 2 days after is the Connectathon. The Connectathon is currently sold out, but if you haven't got a ticket and would like one, you can send an email to events@hl7.com.au, go on the wait list. And on the other side, if you have got a ticket, but now know you can't attend, please send an email to that same email so that someone else can get your ticket, given these are very popular and we have limited space, making sure as many people as possible can go. Okay, moving into our first proposals for the day. It's around default obligations and performance requirements. So this was sent out. I'll provide a link in the chat in a second, last Friday, but we're looking at opportunities where we can try and streamline our decision-making in the TDG, sorry. So currently when we're looking at proposals, we're identifying elements as must support. We then got to work out actor obligations about whether they must populate that element or they must handle the element or they're not error on that element. And then we have to work out, well, what actors need to support these resources and the search parameters, the RESTful interactions, all these sorts of things. And there's a reasonable pattern to what we're already doing. So looking here at providing a set of defaults so we don't have to explicitly go through them in every single decision on something new that we want to add to the eRequesting IG. This would enable us to make a proposal and say, with the default obligations and conformance requirements, and then all of those would apply. But it doesn't mean that we can't deviate. absolutely. Where we want to deviate, we'll just make it as part of the decision, or the proposal would say the same as the defaults except for this exception, right? We want to change this thing because it doesn't align with the defaults. So I might just put this in chat, the link, so you can have a look. That's the right link. Yep. I will also just give a bit of context about what we're doing. So this is our current version of the eRequesting IG. If we have a look at our profiles and extension, and then pick something like diagnostic request. So here we have the flags on, let's pick something a bit easier, status, for example. So we have a flag in here saying that it's must support. The S means it's a must support element. We have the O, which means there are obligations to go with that must support element. And then our obligations are listed over here in this table, where we have different actors, and we say the placer shall populate, the biller shall handle, the server is able to populate, and the patient actor has no error. Then we then have down here search parameters as well, where there are obligations on support for this search parameter. Most of these come out through the capability statements for different actors. Having a look under actors and capabilities, we have our placer, our biller, our patient, server, and each of these have a capability statement. In that capability statement, we have a number of conformance requirements. So let's have a look here. For example, for the resource type service request, you're expected to support read, search, update, and create. These search parameters, these includes support these profiles. So you'll say over here, for the interaction summary for service request, shall support read, shall support search type, should support create, should support update, shall support these search parameters. So there's a lot here to explicitly detail every single time we want to add a resource or a search parameter or anything here. So by having a set of defaults that we agree to will help with our decision-making practice to say we're going to apply the defaults unless otherwise. So I'll just walk through the Confluence page, the links in the chat. So this, we're seeking comment. I don't think anyone actually commented on the page over the last week. Hopefully that means that everyone agreed with it. But maybe it means not many people had a look, but we'll walk through it now and see if we agree that this is a good idea. So default obligations on must support elements. So the definition of must support in FIRE indicates which data elements systems are required to support in a meaningful way. Now, the IG guides don't enforce obligation on must support elements. Sorry, FIRE implementation guides do enforce obligations on must support elements using obligation definitions. So these specify when and how applications must handle specific data elements, ensuring interoperability and consistent behavior. So there's a link here which gives you off all the obligation codes that we've kind of talked about in the past about being able to, the ones we're looking at here is about able to populate, populate if known, populate, but there's a whole heap of others in here, but there's about 4 that we're using at the moment, and we've been consistently using them to date. So what it seems to make sense here is that we could have defaults for our must support element obligations based on the cardinality of the element. So for example, here, the cardinality is 0, so it's optional, that most of our resources will be created by the placer. They're the one placing the request, they're the one creating the request. So most of our resources would be created by the placer. And therefore, if the cardinality is 0, meaning it's optional, the obligation on the placer would be populate if known. And then the filler needs to be able to handle that element. The server needs to be able to handle it and populate. And that's given that the server is the intermediary. So it needs to be able to handle what it gets given, and it needs to be able to populate it when it's providing it to a filler or another actor. And we've got a pretty low bar at the moment for the patient actor, which is just don't error if you get one of these. It's kind of up to you what you do with that information, but don't error. Expect it to be part of the payload. On the other hand, if the cardinality is one something, one-to-one, one-to-many, whatever, then it's a mandatory element, and therefore the obligation on the placer is shall populate. So that's the only difference here, is basically the obligation on a placer actor is populate if known if the cardinality is 0, or populate if the cardinality is 1. I might just break there for a second. Is there any questions on must support element obligations defaults there? Any questions, concerns, need further detail? All right, I'll keep going, but jump in. If you've got a question, raise a hand. Happy to answer them as we go through. So now we're looking at moving on from obligations, default actor conformance requirements. So this one here is the default resource implementation conformance requirement. I couldn't find a better word for this, given it's not really well described. But it's basically the default conformance requirement to support a resource type defined in the IG. So I'll show you what that looks like in a capability statement. So there is this resource conformance over here is shall. So what we're saying here is the server actor. So this is the capability statement for the server actor. And for service request, it shall support service request. And it's going to support these profiles in service request. And then it should support coverage, right? So there's different conformance requirement there, and should encounter and the like. So what we're talking about here is this conformance obligation here for the resource type. So looking here, looking at the defaults here being potentially that the server shall support the resource type, and the placer shall support it, the filler shall support it, and the patient actor should support it. So these are the defaults. This would be the default position. That the reasoning around the shalls is if the placer uses it and creates it, the server needs to support it. And if the server supports it, in theory, and the placer has thought it's important enough to create, that the filler should be able to, or shall be able to, consume it. So looking at those defaults, again, these are defaults. At any point we decide, you know what, it's no longer, the filler doesn't need to know about this resource type. We could change that to a should or a may or the like, but as defaults, it seems to make sense that the key actors all need to support these resource types. For search parameters, the server shall support all the search parameters. The placer, the filler, and the patient may. There's no obligation that they have to use a search parameter just because it's there. And you think if we ever did it, if someone ever did in the future conformance testing for this, forcing you to use a search parameter doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for a client app. Depending on your business logic, how you're going to use it, you don't necessarily have to use search parameters, but the server does have to support it. Similarly for search modifiers, so these are things like underscore include, underscore rev includes. Server needs to support it. Others may use them. And then looking at the RESTful interaction conformance requirements. So the RESTful interactions are around over here, this interaction summary about being able to, what we've currently got for the server is shall read and search and should create an update. So following that pattern, that we would expect the server by default to support, shall support read, shall support search, should support update and create. Now, the reasoning, we had a decision in a previous TDG. Previously, the server was set as shall support update and create, and we moved that back to shoulds. And this is the scenario where it's the server's essentially a facade, and the eRequests are being created in the back end somewhere. There's no explicit RESTful API interactions to do the create or updates. So these can be optional, but they do need to provide the information to the other actors through the read and search. To place read, search, update, and create is all shoulds. And this where, you know, you may have a combination of a placer also being a server, or a filler also being a server. So yeah, these have been separated in that way. And the filler default should on read, should on search, and patient should on read and should on search as well. So does that make sense, everyone? Are there any questions or any concerns about having these as our defaults for decision making? I would expect we will still say when we're making a decision, including the default obligations and conformance requirements, so that these would apply, and gives us the opportunity to reference back to this and go, oh, hang on, we want to change this one. This needs to be a shall. We'll make just that change rather than have to agree on everything every single time. Okay. Well, there's no questions on the chair, so I can't, but would anyone like to make a motion to accept these default obligations for must support elements and actor conformance requirements?
I'm happy to do that, Michael Osborne.
Thanks, Michael. Do we have a second?
I'll second it once you get yourself off mute.
Yep. Thanks, Angus. Okay, I will launch a poll. Let's find it. Hopefully you can see that. Everyone see the poll? Yep, I'm getting votes. Slowing down a bit. I'll just go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll end that poll. So we have 24 affirmative plus 1 from Steph in the chat. So 25 affirmative, 0 negative, and 8 abstained. So that motion has passed. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully that'll make our life a bit easier moving forward. Okay, my health record consent withdrawal feature proposal. So we did discuss this one a little bit last meeting, and Andy walked us through a bit of it, but as a bit of a summary, for the My Health Record upload consent, it's a withdrawal of consent. So it's assumed consent unless explicitly withdrawn. So if there's no consent resource with a deny, then it's assumed permit. So essentially, it's a withdrawal of consent. So unless you've withdrawn your consent is given. A reference to a list of service requests. It's denying on the disclosure of the diagnostic report resource. So it's not on the request itself. It's actually on the diagnostic report. That's the outcome of their request. It's an opt-in policy, and it's basically a disclosure category. with patient privacy. So I might jump to the feature. Oh, good. Steph put it in the chat for us. Now there's also, I'll also put in the chat here, this has been implemented in a branch in IT. So you can actually look at how it would look. Andy, did you want to talk to this at all?
I don't think there's a lot more to say other than what you did. It's pretty much a once-off for something that is fundamental to eRequesting in association with the existing policy settings with upload to my health record. Really the only, I think the thing I read last week was really around making use of such consents robust to policy changes. In the, see at the moment, if there is no consent resource, then the assumption is that the default policy applies, which means upload will occur, should occur, and this withdraws that. There's an argument that I had previously made, which is to say we should make such consents explicit all of the time. However, that's there's no real issue in terms of a difference of behaviours. It's simply that if in future, for instance, we moved away from not having it is kind of opting out or opt-in, whichever it is, the default. So if the default changed to you actually have to explicitly allow it, then all of the systems would have to be modified to deal with this in light of no consent being provided. But at the moment, the way we implement this is exactly as specified, which is really to say this, you always upload or provide the mechanism to do so unless this withdrawal of consent is provided in the order package. And it's not one consent per test, it's the consent links to all of the service requests that you've defined.
Dave?
Just a quick question. Would this resource always be sent or only been sent when the consent has been withdrawn?
Yeah, that's the thing I was just talking about. At the moment, only sent when it's withdrawn.
Okay.
So the default consent, as I say, I have two minds about this. There's kind of a premise in IT that you kind of have this thing of separating policy from mechanism, so that you are somehow insulated from policy changes over time, and that the system is robust to then be able to deal with that. So by making it explicit, it does actually make you a little more robust, and then you're explicitly providing that. But R4 consent, to be honest, is not the greatest thing in the kit bag. R5 consent's much better, but we're working with what we've got. So it's a relatively easy starting point, I think, at the moment.
I'd be interested to hear from the agency about whether this is going to be adequate for them when they're receiving the uploads, whether this data goes all the way through to the uploads, and whether there's some sort of, I think, reconciliation at certain periods to say, well, here's all of the records we didn't upload and here's why.
Well, this prevents the upload, right? So
this prevents the upload, but you've got to almost, I wonder whether the agency are going to want to see a reconciliation of the records that weren't uploaded. Not get the records, but be told that there are records that aren't being uploaded, and here's the declaration. I'm not sure what the sort of full circle of data there looks like.
would certainly be useful to not only define that in terms of intent, but also the actual, especially Firebase data that was appropriate for that evidence. Certainly the regulations talk about evidence and maintaining that evidence, but at the moment, there's certainly I've not seen any discussion around the form that might take.
I think David from the agency is putting his hand up to answer this. This is great.
No, Ruben was before me, but I've just written the question.
Ruben.
So
Yeah, right. I should start by saying, for those who don't know, I do work for the agency now, but I'm not here with my agency hat on, so don't take these comments as coming from the agency.
Your sound is terrible, Ruben.
Is that any better?
No.
No, just give me a second. I'm trying to fix something.
Here we go, David first.
You bubbled to
sure,
the
I
top,
can,
David.
no. I think Ruben's probably more on the side of what's happening about the reconciliation stuff, and so I'll let him answer that part. My question was this is the consent as per it's an individual request. So somebody just is going, I'm just trying to clarify. So that consent only applies to that report being associated with that request. So if somebody wants to deny the next time, they have to send another one. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
That's all.
It's
not a blanket thing. It's just an individual request based.
So the reference here is to a eRequesting pathology request or an imaging request. So
yeah,
that's what we're referencing.
Okay, and then it just replies to that report generated from that.
I mean, that's not going to stop a SIS platform from sort of recording an enduring consent preference.
Yeah,
but there's no way to specify in this that it is enduring, and it does create a problem when the patient is unaware that there is an enduring request, and there's no way to query that in a standard way. So I think that's a whole other potential service exploration around the managing of enduring requests, because I think it is problematic when, you know, the enduring request may actually sit with multiple parties in the pathway. So you could have an enduring request that is somehow taken up by the practice versus taking up by the diagnostic provider, etc. And you know, if you say nothing, then you might end up carrying this enduring request that you know nothing about.
Yeah.
The only way to probably flag that is the patient saying, ringing up the My Health record saying, hey, where are my results on this particular one? And then that might start an investigation, but it'd be tricky to try and track it down otherwise, I think.
Ruben, you sound a bit better.
Am I sounding any better?
Yeah,
a little bit better. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Look, I'll be quick. I see some more hands up here. A couple of points. Firstly, I agree with what I think David said earlier on. It would be really good to get the agency across this. Secondly, looking at what's on the screen, what immediately caught my eye is that the policy element is not populated. And I do think that there needs to be a policy asserted to which this pertains. So the elements of policy are authority, which is the enforcement source for the policy, and a URI, which is the specific policy covered by this consent. I think those are pretty fundamental to using the consent resource, and I would recommend that that be considered for population. The last point I want to make is I heard Andy mention the importance of this, and I do agree it's important to cover this feature, but at the same time, it's not clear to me how the eRequesting we're working on here fits into the My Health record architecture. And I think that's something which really does need to be covered off if this is going to become part of just FireIGen. Thanks.
Can I just ask a question? Are you talking about the current My Health record architecture or the future Fire
I'm talking
architecture.
I'm talking about the architecture that will pertain to implementation of this via IG.
Yeah, well, happy to get some insights into that. At the moment, this is as part of, I guess, the workflow interaction of eRequesting. This is part of that, part of the workflow support based on policy setting. What it means to, at the moment, the obligation of upload sits behind a black box at filler, and it doesn't come into this, but that's certainly an interesting discussion to have.
Look, I think there's a very real need, Andy. I agree with that aspect of this, especially given what passed through the Senate last night. However, unless the implementation context for eRequesting is harmonized with the miles record context, this could be a bit speculative. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make.
The thing is that the consent applies to the report, which not the request, so that the report will be generated regardless of whether it's an eRequest or a paper request or the like. And on the paper request, there's currently an option to specify on there, do not upload. And this is trying to replicate that in an electronic form for an eRequest. I think that's probably the distinction there. And it's about the report, not the request itself.
Yep. I think my point still applies though, Michael. What that tick box that's on the paper forms at the moment is only there because the workflow at play at the moment was harmonized with the miles record policy. Now, I'm not sure where that harmonization is happening for this implementation context, and that's the point I'm making.
No, Jai?
So I think with the agreed scope that we have for eRequesting R1, we're certainly only looking to replicate essentially what's on the paper form, which is a checkbox at the moment. So the ability to flag where someone has elected to withdraw is the most important component. I agree with Ruben that there's some considerations in the future around the connection point with MHR and even tracking that it's been uploaded and so on, but that's not currently within the scope of what we're trying to achieve with R1. So perhaps it's something that we flag as consideration for R2, unless otherwise advised. But I think for the purpose of this, what we're sort of stepping out here is sufficient in that we can clearly flag that someone has elected to withdraw their upload.
I guess your hand went down.
Jai pretty much said what I wanted to say.
At some point in the future, this data has to be reconciled. What did the consumer consent to when their clinician created the request versus what did the lab upload? I think there's a long way to go before we get to that point of reconciliation. And you're right. My health record on fire project has got to figure out what it's going to consume from where, and that's a long way down the track. It's not an R1 thing.
It does kind of re-prosecute though. This is consent explicit even in light of a default that you may or may not say anything about. And I guess we're kind of taking the lighter approach at the moment and documenting exceptions to consent and not carrying through or looking to carry through any others. So as Jai referred to, on the paper form, there's a checkbox. If you don't check the box, does that imply you're explicitly saying upload? And that's just not clear.
So maybe I'll explain what we do today. So as Andy said, we have a checkbox on request forms. We have V2 orders coming in with an OBX, which effectively basically says don't upload, or it actually goes both ways. It can be deny or allow, even though the allow is sort of implied. but we more focus on, because of the new upload by default, the allow. Sorry, I'll start again. When Sonic first did uploading, we wanted positive allows in our V2 orders. Even though the law was upload by default, we were still in a situation where we had some doctors who didn't agree with it and others. And so we had an approach where if the order came and said, yes, upload, then we would. If the order came through with silence, we wouldn't, right? And that was Sonic's own policy. But with the upload by default, that's clarified a lot of it, right? Because now we can just say, right, we're going to upload by default unless we're told not to, right? So it's actually better with the new rule change because it's now clear, where before it was very unclear. So I don't see a need for the yes upload commandment. We only need the do not upload. I'd also say there's many other reasons that we won't upload. So we have a overarching patient consent. So if a patient rings up Sonic and says, I never want you to send anything to that My Health Record ever again, we set a flag in our laboratory system that says, never send this, regardless of the consent in the episode being ordered, right? So that exists for those sorts of patients. And then there's the pathologist can decide not to upload it. We can't find your IHI. There's a litany of other reasons why we might not legitimately not upload it. I'm also told by the agency verbally that initially it will be more an audit. Like the auditors will come and they'll look at 50 requests and they'll want us to explain why we didn't upload these 10, and we'll have to explain why not. I do see long term, it'd be great if there's an electronic way to query the system and say, what was their consent removed for this report? And I see this resource as being the foundation for that future, but we're a long way from that, right? Like, Sonic having an API where, I don't know, the government can hit it and say, tell me about the My Health Record consent for this report. And we can say, yes, here it is, it was denied, or no, it doesn't exist. All true, but a long way down the track, right? And I don't see anything wrong with this as the beginning. Like, we could reuse this in the future to do that sort of thing. Maybe it needs tweaking, but I think we're so far away from that future reality that this is a 80% good enough for the time, when that comes.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Angus. I would also add that my speculation is, I have to say this is a speculation. No one's in a position to give anything really concrete here, but my speculation is that in order for the agency to really deliver its HIE dream, that a lot of attention is going to be paid to consent and potentially roles-based consent models, and in the context of fire. So I would imagine that over the next few years is going to be given a lot of attention and made fit for purpose. But what you guys have pulled together here, I think with Ruben's really good addition of just mention the policy, having a policy reference is a really, really good start.
I also very much see this resource and agree with Ruben's thing about the policy, but this resource is very, very much like an official form that's already written and someone's effectively signing the bottom saying, yes, do that. And for an implementer's point of view, there's a lot of metadata here, which is like, all I want to know is it withdrawn. And it's a bit like it's a government form with a whole lot of blah, 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 blah sign at the bottom. That's kind of what this is. So yes, it has to be correct. But from an implementer's point of view, it's like, is it denied or is it not denied? And there's one property in there that tells me that.
Okay. Is there any other discussion here? You can see in this profile that nearly everything is a fixed value, right? So we've got things here, it's a patient privacy, it's opt-in, it's denying the disclosure. It's denying the disclosure of a diagnostic report, which is referencing the request. We're referencing the patient, we're referencing the organization. But yeah, otherwise it's a pretty static resource.
Should we consider right down the bottom where it referenced the request, like eventually that would also want to reference the diagnostic reports.
Yeah,
Would that be
it's
true?
one to many. That's why it's one to many, but it must reference the request, right? So it must
Agreed.
reference the request. But when we don't have a report now, so we can't
Agreed.
reference it. And even then, when you do create the request, you can't reference the report because it doesn't exist yet.
No, and
So-
that's why that's why dependence is there. So it's dependence on this request. I don't know how you would go about identifying the diagnostic report.
So and we are now thinking to that future. We would have another profile that is where, let's talk about the opposite, where you sent me the request, Sonic's done the reports, we've not uploaded to the My Health Record because you had this resource on the request. Now there's this fictional future API that you're calling me about a particular report and thinking, why was this not uploaded to My Health Record? And I would like to think, because you'll have a resource that references that report. It's not created by the placer. It's probably going to be like a duplication created by the filler in response to this, or like a pigeon pair with it, isn't it? But I guess that's just all future stuff for down the road. And I assume when you do that, the only thing that's going to change is that reference is going to be like to the report, not to the request. But it's probably all just academic at this stage. We're talking years down the future.
Mitesh?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the current uploading of My Health Record result occurs from the filler side. So it's not the consent. If it's overwritten, it's managed at the diagnostic provider, not in the request. Request only has the consent given or not given. So at the moment, as everyone is discussing, I think it is still too far away to discuss, because this repository is not going to upload result to My Health Record. It's going to be done by the filler.
Yeah. Okay. I think there was no other comments on the page. Is anyone
Sorry,
interested
Michael.
in...
I had one more question. I'm sure there are others on the call who know the answer to this, but can consent be provided by an authorized rep, like a parent or carer? And if so, do we need to support related person references in this?
Good question. It's a good policy question. Yeah, who down this list
do we have a related person resource to even point at this stage?
We
It's
will.
emerging.
It's being added to AU Core.
Yeah, hasn't been added yet.
And even if there wasn't, we
it'll
still have
be
one in
there.
fire. So
Yeah, we have one in file, but there will be an AU Core profile. Yes.
I guess, yeah, Evan, happy to add that. It's a good call out. I don't know, Jai, what's your view on that?
It's actually a good question, and I probably don't know the exact answer, but possibly if we're capturing it in an electronic format rather, then it is a consideration whether we capture the type of person that's given it. So we would assume that carers have some controls based on the settings in My Health Record. I assume that might lead to power of attorney and so on. So there's probably some other components to it. So I think we probably should get some advice around that, which I'm happy to get.
That'd be great, because I do have another question for you. I like Ruben's note that we should reference the source of the policy, and if you could get us a URI that we could somehow slot in there, just so we're pointing at the right thing.
Okay.
Point at the My Health Record Act, don't you?
We have URIs for acts. I'd love it if we did.
A website. I mean, we can download the app.
I'm happy to work with you on that one, Jai, with my agency hat on.
Thanks, mate.
Let's say the whole related person thing is going to be, like whilst there is like nominated representative to my health record, the notion that a doctor, when sitting with the mother and the child, is then somehow going to reference the My Health record and to confirm whether this parent is a nominated representative for that patient and is allowed to withdraw is all very far future. Like I think the related person could be Uncle Bob, and that's a recorded fact. Whether Uncle Bob was allowed to do that is a downstream like thing.
Yeah, but I think this is like many things we do in here, that we're not necessarily attempting to enforce policy. We kind of put the information in that we have access to, and then at some point there's an overlay of interpretation that's got to kind of push the liability and associated risks to those who interpret it.
Okay. Is anyone interested in making a motion on this today?
I will motion that we accept this draft as a working draft into RG with proviso, as Ruben raised, that we add a reference to the actual foundation of the policy into this.
Second that.
Do we want to also add the default obligations and must act a conformance on that, so we get all of these by default on them?
I want to say yes. It's our first attempt at it, but I think they're all going to be standard.
We will have to come back. If we don't do that, we will have to come back and do obligations at some point before ballot. So this gives us the default if that's what we're happy to do, accept the defaults. So Angus, you're happy to make that amendment, or wanted to suggest that amendment?
Yeah, I suggest that we amend Andy's proposal that we also use the defaults for the actors.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second, so I will launch a poll. Is there any more questions before I launch the poll? Poll, here we go. Relaunch poll. Hopefully you can see that out. This is the motion on my health record consent withdrawal, with the addition of the policy, reference to the policy and the default obligations and requirements.
Just for clarity, this would be one resource for your entire request group. It points to AU eRequest pathology request. It would be one consent resource per group.
It can reference to all of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was, we did put that in the slide originally, so it would reference each of the requests in the group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't need
The data is one to many.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't need one for unique instance read.
Yep. Okay, I think the voting seems to slow down, so I'll stop in that poll. So we have 21 plus 1 in the chat. So that's 22 affirmative, 0 negative, and 5 abstain. So that motion has passed. Oh, I'll share the results. Okay. About half an hour.
Michael, can I just ask that we did capture those actions?
Yeah.
It's me, and yep, they're captured. You're on the list.
Well, not me. I'm pointing at
Jai and
Jai's on
Ruben.
the list. Yes.
Jai and Ruben are on the list.
And can you just make sure they do the two pieces of work, which is both the policy reference and also the reference for the authority?
Absolutely noted.
Beautiful.
Right. Now the next one, we've got about half an hour left. So we've got communication request feature proposals. Again, this one was sent out last Friday. Confluence page for it. Just giving a little bit of context here back to the AU eRequesting data for interoperability. So distribution list and urgent contact were mentioned in the AU eRec DI, but they've been included as clinically important concepts, but have not been explicitly represented in AU eRec DI, deferring instead the standardization representations of healthcare providers in FHIR IGs. So there's a little bit of guidance here from the eRec DI, but it's basically saying that we can use the standard processes in FHIR to implement. So looking at copy 2, there is an AU-based extension currently available where we could use that for copy 2. The alternative to that is using a FHIR communication request. The advantages of using the communication request is there's also a do not perform attribute, and we can also use communication request for urgent communication and communication with patient. Also referencing a task to track fulfillment of the communication request itself. Andy, did you want anything else there on the summary of the about the maybe the distinction between the copy 2 extension and the communication request? Oh, you're on mute.
The copies 2 extension was done in very early days and was a quick fix. And I think given we have more general needs around communication, it does make sense to have more consistency about applying these kind of things within the communication request structure. I personally think that the ability to track fulfillment of a communication request is really important. So if you did ask for a copy 2 and the copy 2 fails because the information provided is not sufficient to actually contact that individual organization, it'd be nice to know, and this gives you a mechanism to do that. I'm sure this is not the last of the sets of communication requests that we'll use, but it's certainly a core part of the workflow that we assume is part of well-working clinical collaboration, and this is what it's designed to provide. As Michael noted, the do not perform makes this into a kind of consent to say do not contact. So we, I think, need to be quite judicious about allowing for it or denying that you can actually use that attribute, because it doesn't really make sense in some situations to go to the entire effort to say communicate to this individual, but don't do it. That's going to make the communication quite complex if you've always got to take into account that there's some withdrawal of that. Obviously, for some things in our experience where it does make sense is there are a number of patients or organizations that request the communication to the patient not happen, even though there is information provided about contact mechanisms. They may very well, I do not want to be contacted about this. But that brings up a whole broader question about fulfillment and the foundations of fulfillment. And there are certain situations where, for instance, you can only safely deliver potentially a diagnostic service by being able to communicate with the patient. Not always, but there are cases of that. So we need to think through that as well. I think it's about it.
All right. Right. So these are we've got a proposal. Steph's put a link in the chat, but this is around the different types of communication requests we've got in the proposal. So copy 2 the clinician to be informed about the results. Urgent provider, which is direct communication from a filler to a clinical provider for the purpose of providing urgent results. Patient, so direct communication from a filler to the patient. Sometimes the communication is not to be performed. That's what Andy just spoke about. And then we've also got in there a communication request task for tracking fulfillment of a communication request. So these are covered off in that proposal. That the link is in the chat. There is also a branch, which is just a draft branch. We're using branches at the moment so that we can walk TDG through some of these things and you get a feel for what they look like. They're just draft branches, so we can use it for demonstration. Copy 2. So this is one we just talked about, the a copy to a clinician. Andy, do you want to go through any of this? Is there anything in here particularly?
I think one of the things to note is I think all carry the historical use of something like a copy to, in that the options available when you think of it from a V2 perspective are quite limited. We don't necessarily have those constraints in what we're potentially wanting to do in Fire. So, you know, there's a lot of attributes here which introduce some other things we can do. So, for instance, you know, does it make sense to copy to urgently? Should there be a priority on copy to? Does it make sense to somehow represent the structure or the medium through which that copy to information should be provided? So, for instance, you know, should you in this be able to say copy to should be sent as a fax, copy to I want this to you know, be emailed, copy to I want this to be delivered through some other means. These are all common attributes in kind of the communication request and its fulfillment. At some point, you kind of want to then also work through the failure modes of these kind of different mediums to make sure that we're covering the range of uses. And I guess in particular, thinking of, yes, backward compatibility to the common use cases of today, but also thinking forward to, I guess, future use cases that may actually be readily accessible with these new kind of mechanisms that we otherwise wouldn't have had kind of ready to go in the old world. In this, I on the copy too, I kind of said you shouldn't allow do not perform. You know, I think you could potentially argue that, you know, somewhere in this you want to say, well, do not send anything to this clinician, and somehow do that on a copy too. But you know, copy 2 is that's not a normal version 2 kind of copy 2 world. You're not sort of copy 2ing with denial. You're only placing those that you intend to receive within that copy 2 list. This is putting the obligation of communication on the filler. There is no reason why, you know, you obviously can't also send the results from a places perspective during the receipt process as well. There's also an argument here, you know, does it make sense to think of my health record as a copy 2 recipient? As opposed to, and do we just limit the copy to kind of metaphor to individual clinicians? What is it? Organizations? Is a copy to really another means to send results to a patient as well? And getting explicit then on the, again, the medium and the mechanism with which you want to do that. It certainly has some broader uses. You know, everyone will say that then, you know, often on forms it's, you know, please email the patient these results. So I think we shouldn't be ignoring the reality of some of that stuff that's happening today.
Dave?
I was just going to say, I don't think we can just think of my health record as being another copy 2, unless someone at ADHA is going to work out which person's MHR it belongs to. So at the moment, if you're a filler and you're sending a report back to a doctor, you've got pretty good idea of who's going to see that and who's going to receive it. But working out which My Health record it goes to is itself a technical and practical challenge. So it's not simply a matter of sending another copy of a report to the way that you would send another report to a doctor. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I don't agree with using the communication resource to send a copy to the My Health record. I think you could, and I think it's fairly clear which My Health record you're sending it to. You're sending it to the patient's My Health record. But I think it's implied in Australia. The government has made it implied in Australia that you will send a copy to the My Health record unless told otherwise, and therefore I don't know if we need to then bolster that with communication requests on every single request that says send a copy of the My Health record. I think we live in we're moving to a world where by default it will be unless told otherwise. I do know that some LISs use the copy to mechanism in their laboratory system as the means of sending it to the My Health record. But to me, that's just a back end way that they do it. It's got nothing to do with the interoperability of the eRequest coming in. You know, if they want to take the consent resource and set the copy to field in their laboratory system to My Health record because that's how it works in their business, then that's fine. But I don't think we need communication resources saying send to the My Health record.
Yeah, and this is being requested by the placer. So yeah, it would then be the placer explicitly saying send it, sort of crossover with the consent we just talked about. We do also have here currently in this proposal, the recipient is specified as an AU core practitioner role. So that is the recipient of the communication.
I wonder whether that needs to also be patient, or is that another communication resource?
That's different. That's further down the list. So this is just for the copy to. And this was in the description, requested to find a copy to clinician. Was in the description.
That other patient one is actually a different purpose, though. That it's not about communication of the result. It's actually about communication during the process of delivering the service. So there's a slightly different nuance to its use, I guess. And here, the recipient, this is a question about, is it now or is it tomorrow that we introduce, I guess, one is a patient into that potential recipient of the report. But the other one, I guess, I ask is, and why I raised the My Health record as a recipient, is that I would have hoped at some point in future that I could have nominated an organization to be an endpoint for my results. So let's say I am working with a diabetes specialist organization that manages my diabetes, and in doing so, I want them to have an accurate set of my results because they coordinate my diabetes care. And can you send then that to that organization? You could say, well, it's got to be a clinician within that organization, but I don't know what the regulatory setting is around nominating non-clinicians or non-patients to receive results.
It's a very different use case to My Health. It's sort of maybe technically similar, but it's very different.
Oh, it is. It is, and we already have a mechanism for My Health record that's a black box behind the scenes within the labs. I guess what I'm calling out in the copy 2 is that in copy 2, this is a relatively general mechanism to say that there has been a request that the results of this diagnostic service be provided to some other parties, and how constraining are we going to get of those options?
Yeah, I think it's a huge can of worms, because then the consent question comes back in, isn't it? It's like, I got consent to send it to this other repository. I might have some American online app, My Health app, that's great at storing all my health information, and you want me to send a copy to it. But I'm like, well, what authority? Just because the request said send a copy to random US endpoint, there's a whole authentication, consent, there's many other facets to that, which are huge blowout of scope, aren't they?
But we don't know that with even the clinical recipients. Are they actually Australian? Like, if I provide you a patient role, then, we're now saying that we're going to constrain that patient role to must contain a Medicare provider number, must contain an HPII. How do we want to do that?
I mean, it kind of works today in that, Sonic, for instance, if you said send a copy to random person, we probably wouldn't, right? We'll send a copy to a known doctor, which we feel is a known doctor because they're in our system as a doctor, and we'll send it there, no question. We'll send it to the patient because the patient's address, because this report had the patient's address on it, and we'll happily send a report to them if you instruct us to. But I don't know if we'd send a report to just random other person because the doctor said so on the form. I don't know, it gets vague there. I don't know if some accidentally do, but I'd like to think we don't.
David?
I'm pretty sure there are Privacy Act limitations on who the report can go to as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, as Angus said, sending it to a known clinician is one thing, but sending it to a person who's just an unknown, I mean, what provider's going to risk multi-million-dollar fines over that? Unless they know who they're sending it to, they're going to want to be really sure that they're allowed to do that. This isn't just a technical challenge, it's a Privacy Act thing.
And Andy, I think you brought up another thing which I've been meaning to put on our Sparked radar, which is identification of the provider, like Medicare provider numbers, HPIIs. Like, I don't think, not necessary now, but that's another big topic we really haven't boiled into. Like, when you say this is a report for this doctor, are we going to mandate you have a Medicare number? Are we going to mandate it's a HPII? Does it need to be one or the other? Like, because, and you just say Dr. Bob in Scarborough, that's another whole field we haven't really delved into.
I guess the question at the moment is, with that recipient, are we just going to go, and I don't think it's our role at the moment to obligate, to put in constraints around, consent or anything else around it. We're just carrying the information that has been needed to be carried in the transaction. The question is, really, is it the time to put in AU patient? Is it the time, as we talked before, AU related person? Or are we just going to stick with this for now and go, that's an R2 issue to worry about? I mean, I guess I'm more apprehensive about pushing the patient off to R2 because it kind of, I think we need to, by act, not just kind of talking about it, actually have the patient front and center in this. And the more we kind of push that to the side, we don't really provide that as a proactive part of this.
I think it is a reality of today, and people tell me if they disagree, that doctors will write on a form, copy to patient. Like, their intent is that we're allowed to communicate this to the patient. And I think the world's changing a bit. Like, when I started in a lab, the default is you don't give the report to a patient; it goes back to the requesting doctor. And then there was this sort of commandments for people to write on the form, copy to patient. And I know in the lab I worked back 20 years ago, we'd actually print a copy and send it in the mail to the address of the patient, right? In response to that. I believe that still goes on in some frame. So I don't think it's something, I think it is a thing we do. Definitely copies to doctors, but copy to patient I think it happens.
What do you think, John? Is this, given your sage advice before around just wait till R2 on this, is the optics of this that it is something that we should be looking at including now? I mean, it's not necessarily problematic to include it, and it's not, you don't have to make it mandatory, for instance, oh, you must include this. We could actually leave it entirely optional, but I'm a bit of a fan of creating a exposure of these points, especially when it comes to patient.
It's also not a must do for the filler, right? Like if you say copy to Joe Blogs, it's fine for you to say that to us. It's fine for us to not do that.
And I guess that's the ultimate question. What's the function of it, and what are the places required to do if it is populated? So if we don't have some clarity around that, then I think there's some more thinking that we need to do before we put it into the guide.
Yeah.
So I agree that if we put it there as an option, then it's fine. We're not sort of mandating it or anything like that. But I guess there's a question of, is it going to be used and how consistently will it be used?
I guess the other thing we do have up our sleeve here is that if we are around these communication requests putting tasks that have failure modes, then the appropriate thing to do would be, I'm sorry, I can't do this, which you could almost like do a rejection and just go, the rejected reason we're unable to send to patients. And at least then you would be clear on, yes, I'm happy to receive copies to all sorts of, clinicians, patients, or whatever, but, it's always the reserve the right that this may not be possible, which I imagine today would happen if you provide, I know that labs probably go out of their way, even if if they don't necessarily have the correct, I don't know, Medicare provider number or something, that they will do their best endeavors to deliver, but there will be instances where something that's been in the copy 2 is unable to be fulfilled, I'm assuming.
Agree. I think we have people just trying their best. They're even ringing the requesting doctor going, who is this person you wanted a copy to? But, eventually it may not happen.
And one of the values here is that, and what we don't have in the version 2 world is that there is no graceful failure. Whereas here, I think we're allowing for graceful failure around this, and it's not exactly, it's not everything's fallen over. It's just to make sure that if you did request something, we can actually now provide meaningful feedback on the ability to do those kind of things.
And I guess for implementers, we're providing that ability to, but we're not insisting. Like we kind of do this with Magenta at the moment, or we do this, but those tasks we just complete with the reports. So we're not skilled enough to granularly say, hey, we did contact the doctor, that task is complete, or no, we couldn't contact them, that task is failed. We today consume these in, and then we just set those tasks as complete when we complete the reports. We're unfortunately not actually saying, yes, we contacted the doctor. We're just saying we've done all the work we're going to do, and we hope we might have contacted the doctor. And I guess I'm just highlighting that we're trying to lay a highway here for a far more granular, better future. But your day one of implementing this might be where Sonic is, where we're just, thank you for the request to contact this doctor, complete, we've done whatever we might do, whether that was we did or didn't.
So just to summarize, I think we're talking here about the recipient, and currently it's in this proposal bound to an AE core practitioner role. I think what we're debating is whether we add an AE core patient in there and allow you to use a patient or practitioner role for that recipient. I think, Angus, on your point too about what's the minimum requirement for a practitioner, like those details, that's something we need to look at as a whole in eRequesting, because the AU core profiles are generic profiles across all use cases. We actually, at some point, need to look at those and go, well, in eRequesting, a practitioner has to have these minimum requirements, right? That without it, it doesn't, we can't use it. So it's not something we'd do as part of this, but at some point in eRequesting, we do need to say we need to agree on what the minimum requirements, and we may have to profile some AU core profiles and make them eRequesting profiles. So they'll inherit from AU core, but then we'll add additional constraints on them, some additional must support, some maybe changing cardinality, putting obligation on actors and those sorts of things. So that is something we do need to put on the radar for eRequesting.
If you want me to take an action, I'll put the feelers out at Sonic going, what do we do about copies to patient? Like, is it a thing? Do we still do it? What's the process? That helps.
That would be good. And anyone else? Rosemary, South Australia Pathology, it'd be good to get others' views, or at least this is what's currently happening. The only other thing I was going to note on this is, given we are talking about multiple communication requests, we do need a way of distinguishing them from each other, because when you get a big package of an order and then you're pulling all these communication requests out, you've got to be able to go, what kind of communication request and what is this asking for? And that is something we've also looked at in this, and that was that the reason code down the bottom, which is giving us an easy way of distinguishing the type of communication request it was. Otherwise, you've got to have this kind of magic where you look at various attributes and somehow determine that this was a copy to versus something about patient communication and which type of patient communication is it, etc. Michael, I know we're running out of time. Can I propose we go with this as a starting point, at least for the Connectathon? So I would motion that we do this. I think we just add AU patient on there for now, just as a holding pattern. We don't go into any more detail about the distinguishing of the kinds of practitioner roles and how we do it, nor the patients, but at least let us begin to explore its use. And if there is a need later on, is whether it's through the ballot or prior to that, that we think through experience that we've got some better insights, then we can appropriately make such a change.
Did you talk here about contained or not, Andy?
I don't really want to go into that, to be honest.
Yeah, okay.
I think that begins to ask questions about I don't want to say it must be contained, as is probably said there. I think we should just leave it open at the moment, and we'll constrain it.
Yep.
Maybe at the Connectathon we'll all agree, let's just do contain for the first bit, because it's going to make more sense.
Yep.
Second that, whatever that was.
So the motion was to accept this with the addition of AU core patient as a recipient. Was there a change there to the contained?
Yeah, we'll remove that reference to contained.
Okay, so remove the contained reference. Otherwise, accept as is. Did anyone want to specify default obligations and conformance?
Yes, I'm happy to.
Yes, all right.
Do that.
So that's the motion. You're still happy with the second of that? Now it's clarified, Michael?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, I will launch a poll. Okay, you should see a poll now for accepting this proposal for communication request copy 2. Okay, quite a few votes already, so I think I'll just close that off now in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that poll has ended. So we've got 24 plus 1, so 25 affirmative, 0 negative, and 4 abstain. So that motion has passed. Now, we've only got 4 minutes, so I don't think we're going to get to a vote on these, but hopefully we can cover them off reasonably quickly at the beginning of the next meeting. So we had another communication request here for urgent provider. We have a communication request for patient. I do I had a comment on here. Subject was missing from patient. Was that deliberate? Do you know, Andy, or not? It was on the other two communication requests, but not this one. Anyway, you can take that on notice.
It's because it's do not, isn't it? Is that why you've taken it off?
Do not is in this one is actually can be true or false. It's not. So do not is actually included on this one.
Reason, then.
Anyway, we take that on notice. I'll put a comment on the page.
Okay.
We've now got the communication request task as well. One of the questions I had about the communication request task was around, it was currently tagged as a fulfillment task, whether we'd have a different task type for that, or it's still a fulfillment task.
No, it's still a fulfillment task because it's still fulfilling a request.
Yep. I just wasn't sure whether there needed to be distinction when Angus is writing queries against this. I got a whole communication request task.
To that point, how do we go about? So I've got to ask, it points to a communication resource. How do I go about working out what sort of communication resource that is? Is it a request for a patient? Is it one for the doctor?
Because we just went through that because the reason code.
Reference to it, and then the reason code.
You got a code on each communication.
This one's patient, so the reason code's patient. The reason on this one's urgent, and the reason on this one's copy to.
Beautiful. Yep.
I think I had one more question on the bottom here, or not question, statement, that we probably have an abstract profile for communication request as well, given there's a lot of commonality between all of these. It may make sense to have an abstract profile for that as well.
Yeah, it's a reasonable request.
But we'll leave this Confluence page is still here. So please review this, add any comments prior to next week's meeting, so that we can address them then, and we can make votes on urgent provider and communication request for the patient and the communication request task for tracking fulfillment of the communication request. So we will come back to those in the next meeting. Is there anything else you wanted anyone to think about with that, Andy, before we?
No, it's all good.
Close out? All good. All right. So next meeting. So we have next meeting on the 27th of February. I've got another one on the 13th of March. That 18th of March is that symposium work group meeting day. So if you're in Sydney or will be in Sydney and want to come along to the TDG day or session on that as well, please sign up for that on Eventbrite. Then we've got the Connectathon the 2 days afterwards. Like I said, they're ticketed separately. So even though the Connectathon's sold out, you can still get tickets to the symposium and our TDG meeting. And then back into another normal TDG meeting on 27th of March. So that's where we're at. I'll send out some more proposals before the next TDG. We've already got that one out there now for communication request. I'll send out some more information about other proposals before next meeting. So if you get the opportunity to have a look, go to a Confluence page, comment on the page. All feedback is welcome, all questions, anything you want to add to there, more than welcome. So thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.